Okay, so this video is going to be about site cost 101, and it's going to be pretty detailed, but just give you a really good understanding of what site costs are, and also understand or help you understand and educate you on why they're so confusing. So we'll jump straight in. So site costs relate to the preparation of your site and the foundation of your home. Now, I have said this before, but every block is different, and therefore each block needs to be reviewed individually to determine what requirements and what costs need to apply to it. It's also the reason why we can't put site costs into a base price wholly and solely. Like in some cases, you'll have site costs included up to a certain point. So with us, for example, we include site costs up to a H1 and 500 mil of fall, okay, which you'll learn a bit more about in a second. But some builders just don't include site costs because they will visit it based on where that house is being built, okay? That's the first thing to understand. Over the years, I've just used this diagram for clients, and they've always understood very clearly, straightforward. If you were to buy lot number one and I was to buy lot number two, which one would have the cheaper site costs? Now, obviously, lot number two, because you can see that lot number two would be more expensive because you can see that's on an angle and it's going to require a little bit more work. So if you were to put a house on lot number one, it's nice and flat, it's nice and easy to build on, it's going to be pretty straightforward, not cost too much. When you go to lot number two, bit of work required, the builder will have to cut into this section. And don't get me wrong, there's more complexity than this, but this is I guess, a nice simple way to present this. Essentially, they would cut this side here, then they'd have to fill this side in to make that level to enable you to put the house on top. So that requires extra work, and compared to lot one, therefore this would be more expensive. Now, in some cases, you'll also be needing to provide, and it doesn't look exactly like this, but just for visual reference only, provide some additional support or piering along the bottom of the slab to make sure it's rock solid so that the house's foundation is secure. Now, obviously, the cost of these would be in addition as well. Okay, so you might build the exact same house as I do, identical floor plans, but you build on lot one and I build on lot number two. Our prices and our quotes are going to be different. Mine will be more expensive based on the site costs. So when it comes to pricing site costs up front, one thing I like to share is that every builder is taking a risk. It's a little bit like a mechanic providing you with a price to repair your car up front without seeing the condition of the car or without even knowing what vehicle it is or what year it was made. Okay, so it's a bit of a risk that they could take, I guess, have a guesstimate of, on average, the cars that I get are 5 to 10 years old, etc., etc. They cost this much to repair, and they come back with an average. That's pretty much what a builder's doing, but they can use historical data if they've built in the estate your block is in. So it's still a bit of a risk because at the end of the day, they don't know categorically and factually the condition of that site until they complete, get what's called engineering completed. So that requires surveys and a whole bunch of other things, but essentially that's what's required. But that doesn't happen till way down the track. So as I said, they're taking a bit of a risk. Now, when you get a block of land, and this is how it does work as a result, you pretty much the new estate, the developer will provide you and they'll provide us, will have access to plans of subdivision and engineering plans, and there are some other documents as well, but essentially these are the most common ones. So the plan of subdivision is, sort of tells you how big your block is, what the width of it, 16 metres in this case, and what the depth is. So that's a 32 metre deep block. Excuse me, a little bit of a curve there. So that's actually 31.3 metres on that side. Bit of information there. It'll tell you what way it's facing, if it's north or south or west, etc. And then to help determine the site cost, we have this thing called an engineering plan. And then they have these little numbers here that actually represent what we call levels. And then that will tell us the level of fall and the amount of fill that's on that block. Now, I'm not going to go into that detail. It's really not necessary for this. What I would say is that if the consultant can get their hands on the plan of sub, the engineering plan, and some other documents that help, they'll be in a position to provide you with some site costs. Okay, so that's what they'll use, those documents there. Now, one thing I want to highlight is what easements are. So if we go back to this slide, you'll see there's a little dotted line back here. under there is what's called an easement. So essentially, the easement is the sewerage, mainly the sewerage. There are other types of pipes. To make it easy, pipes underground is what an easement is. And a lot of the time they're in the backyard. Sometimes they're at the front. Sometimes they're down the side of a block. But for the most part, some blocks that are purchased have an easement at the back. Now, that's just a pipe sitting underground that goes across the back of the blocks in your street. And one of the things that I like to help you understand is that you cannot build a house too close to an easement. Now, the reason for that is that if a council was to come along and need to repair this easement one day, they would need to dig this up. And therefore, your house no longer has all of this land to sit on and to rely upon. It only has this little gap here. So what a builder will do is when they do site costs, depending on your proximity to an easement, there are different terms to use, but let's just say how close you are to an easement, will then essentially provide additional support underneath, additional piering underneath, just to make sure that if that ever happened, then the house would make sure that, or be sure to support itself. Okay, so when you're building close to an easement, it can cost you or will cost you more. Okay. The as I already showed you, sorry, the easements here are marked on your plan. So if you have your land contract for your land, you'll see a little dotted line here, and sometimes I have a number in it to represent the depth of that easement. In this case, it's 3 meters. And there will be a legend on the engineering plan that outlines exactly what sort of easement that represents. So when we go through it, as I sort of showed you sort of briefly, when we build the house on top of the land, we could just probably nice flat block, do site costs like that. However, when the easement is involved, you need to cut that out. They need to provide the additional piering, okay, as I've sort of been through. The handy tip, some builders may also include government costs in their quotation as a separate item. These are essentially referred to as items like OH&S, temp fencing, crossovers, silt barriers, etc. I call them all site costs. So just look, whether it's got site costs here and government costs there, group them together because that's ultimately what a site cost is. Okay, so treat them as part of overall site cost figure as they fall in the same category. Great, thanks. We'll see you for the next video.